So for example, there might be a relationship between, or an association between carrying matches and lung cancer. Just because we find those who carry matches in their pocket, and there's a relationship with lung cancer, carrying around matches doesn't lead to lung cancer. It's the fact that people who carry around matches are more likely to be smokers, and smokers are more likely to develop lung cancer. So just because there is an association doesn't mean that the exposure actually caused the outcome. What the authors are trying to do here when they're talking about biological plausibility is they're trying to show how it would make sense that this particular exposure would cause the outcome. And again, what the authors are doing here is they're placing their results, right here. They're placing more of their results in context of other findings with respect to frying their foods regularly. What the authors then go on to talk about here is talking about their results that they observed with mediation by hypertension, body weight, and cholesterol factors. And what they're doing is saying that, if we recall the results, it said, when we recall the results, there was some attenuation of the strength of the association between fried food consumption and the outcome. And what they are saying here is multiple cross-sectional studies have also found this attenuation and this relationship between fried food consumption and these factors. And again, giving credence to the fact that these factors might be what's responsible for causing type 2 diabetes and coronary artery disease. It's both relating their results of mediation to what we know, some biological plausibility data. As we continue on, this next paragraph deals a lot, again, with more biological plausibility, talking about why frying at home, or why frying would cause or be related to coronary artery disease. Finally, in this last paragraph, or not this last paragraph, but the second to last paragraph, what the authors address here is the limitations and their strengths of their study. And as I said earlier, as an expert in this field, as I was reading the methods and results section, I read with a critical eye, and so I was trying to anticipate how that particular study design or the particular use of a particular method or the way that we collected information about those exposure outcome variables, how those results or the way that the authors did it might affect the strength or the quality of their study. And so here you can just see that they picked out some limitations. We don't know duration or temperature of frying. Some information, energy intakes might have, by food frequency, might have been underestimated. Again, these are all because I'm a nutrition epidemiologist. I know there are some inherent issues with food frequency questionnaires. I want to make sure that the authors are addressing it in the limitations, and I see that they've adequately addressed some of those issues. They also point out some strengths, including large sample size, which is, given the large sample size, these are appropriate strengths to point out. The last paragraph is just a final conclusion, kind of putting their total study in perspective and summarizing it. Now, before we conclude with this Think Aloud video, I just want to place this particular video in context of your pocket guide. Many of you might have been following along with your pocket guide on how to read an epidemiologic study. Step 2 asks you to comprehend the study and identify the major findings of the study. Step 3 is asking you the set of questions associated with that are asking you to critically evaluate the study. Now, as an expert, I inherently, when I'm reading a study in depth, I am doing both comprehending the article and critically evaluating it at the same exact time. As where you are in this semester or where you were learning all these epidemiologic terms, these might be separate steps for you. As an introductory person to epidemiology or a novice, you may have to go through and answer each of those questions separately, independent of your first comprehension of that particular study. As you will notice, the way that I did it, I often try to ask some of those questions about the study design as I was in the method section, or the information about how the exposure was measured, or how the outcome was measured. How might that impact the results? And in fact, we actually critically evaluated along the way, or I critically evaluated it along the way. Some of the terminology and questions under the critical evaluation step 3 part, you may not know the terminology when you're reading this step 3. What we tried to do in this particular video is to talk about some of those strengths and limitations and biases that might arise from a particular study design without necessarily always using the exact language in the pocket guide. And that's not to say that the pocket guide is wrong or that I was wrong for not pointing those out. It's just that there's a lot of jargon in epidemiology, and by the end of the term, you will be familiar with terms like information bias. There are examples of information bias in this particular study, for example, in the use of the FFQ, and I tried to point out some strengths and limitations of the FFQ, but I didn't necessarily use the term information bias. So as you go through the semester, as you go through step 3, some of these concepts will become more crystal clear as we go along. That's all for the Think Aloud video. Good job listening.